Good morning, good morning. All right, so I wanted to start on something new. I know it's not as doctrinally deep and cool as a bunch of the other books I've read, but I still figure it'd be good to learn from history. So we have Tragedy and Truth, What Happened at Hawn's Mill. This is by General Editor Alexander L. Bach, contributing editors of Glenn Rawson and Dennis Lyman, contributions by Max H. Parkin, Gerrit Dirkmaat, and Brent M. Rogers. So, picked this up at Deseret Book Overflow, and just noticed it was something that seemed like it had a lot of information, because as you see, they have the stories, they have pictures, they have journal entries, and at the end of the chapter they have their big bibliography of everything that they reference. It's all actually pretty interesting. So I will plan on just reading it through and showing the little pictures and such as we go. The notes are interesting because it appears that there is a bunch of information. But I think I'm going to probably just breeze through that and only find those notes that have substantial information that might be interesting. That way we don't get bogged down like flipping back and forth and such. And but yeah, I'm interested in this, so let's get started. See what we can learn from history and how it happened. All right, in the beginning, it starts with that wonderful picture. Mormonism on Missouri's western frontier in 1830 to 1838. This section is by Max H. Parkin. Mission to the Lamanites. The drama of the Mormons in Missouri began on January 13th, 1831, when 5 missionaries, including Oliver Cowdery, Peter Whitmer Jr., Parley P. Pratt, Richard Ziba Peterson, and Frederick G. Williams, an Ohio convert, arrived in Independence, Missouri, a rough-hewn village and seat of Jackson County, situated on the edge of America's frontier, 10 miles from the state's western boundary. In an 1830 revelation, the prophet named the state boundary on the borders of the Lamanites, which the missionaries would soon cross to begin teaching the Indians. Cowdery, the group's leader, noted that they had been sent west to rear up a pillar as a witness where the temple of God shall be built, in the glorious New Jerusalem. Later, that summer, Joseph Smith himself would arrive and designate Jackson County as the land of Zion, and a site immediately west of Independence as location for the temple. The missionaries arrived at Independence, having traveled the last 300 miles on foot in the dead of winter. Parley Pratt recalled that the biting cold and wind blew with such keenness that it would almost take the skin off the face. The inclement season was so remarkably cold and snowy that it became known by settlers as the Winter of Deep Snow. In May 1830, 7 months before the arrival of missionaries, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, signed by President Andrew Jackson, establishing the region west of Missouri and Arkansas as Indian Territory. In the area just west of Jackson County and south of the Kansas River, the Shawnees, a peaceful farming tribe, had been settling for nearly 2 years. However, because of the difficult winter conditions, the Delaware Indians, who had been living in the southern Indiana since 1821, and their leader of white and Indian ancestry, Chief Kikthaw Enud, Enund. No, Kicthawinund, sometimes referred to as uh, Kithilhund. Kithelhund, but also as William Anderson, had only begun arriving on our land just north of Kansas River, where it was a precarious and unsettled condition when the Mormon missionaries arrived. So there was a little kind of footnote back here. See Doctrine and Covenants 32. Oh, it's to tell about the picture there. On this next page, it has a picture of Andrew Jackson. President Andrew Jackson designated the region west of Missouri as Indian Territory, so it has the picture of Andrew Jackson. William Clark is on the other side. So it was just talking about the picture that was in there. So anyways, so the Delaware and the were having a hard time. They were just there, but also the Shawnees were there, peaceful. All right. Upon arriving in Indian Territory, Cowdery, Pratt, and Williams went first to a nearby Shawnee village and tarried one night, wrote Pratt. The following day, they crossed the Kansas River to visit the Delawares and meet Chief William Anderson, an aged and venerable-looking man who had long stood at the head of the Delawares. At first, the chief hesitated to listen to the missionaries until being informed about the Book of Mormon, which increased his interest. The following day, he established a council with 40 of his men to be instructed at length by Cowdery, who again spoke about the Book of Mormon. Their talks continued for several days, and the missionaries received assurance that in the spring that Chief Anderson would build a council house for the missionaries to more completely teach about their religion. Indian agent Richard W. Cummins, however, objected to the missionaries being on the Indian lands without government permit. Peter Whitmer, Jr. reported that Cummins threatened the Mormon elders with imprisonment at the cantonment. That's an interesting word. What is cantonment? Okay. Cantonment. C-A-T. O-C-A-N-T. Kent. Ton. Ment. M-E-N-T. Cantonment. Military residential quarters, temporary or permanent. Cantonment. It's a type of military base. Oh, okay. I did not know that. I have learned something new. And this is why reading is very helpful. All right. So, Richard W. Cummins objected to their presence there, threatened with imprisonment at the cantonment if they continued preaching. Alarmed, Cowdery wrote to General William Clark, Superintendent of Indian Affairs at St. Louis, for a permit for myself and others to establish schools and to teach several tribes. Cummins also wrote to the superintendent, "A few days ago, 3 men, all strangers to me, went among the Indians preaching. I've refused to let them stay unless they first obtained permission from you." Pratt traveled to St. Louis in February to see the superintendent, but Clark was away from his post and did not respond to Cowdery's request. Unable to get a permit, Pratt declared, "Thus ended our first Indian mission." Interesting. So here's the question: why did he do that? I think there's multiple reasons. I mean, if you're on the frontier, you're given an assignment. If you look at it just from this is my employment point of view, he may not have wanted anything to happen to the missionaries in case something got stirred up. He may have used that as an excuse. It could be that, exercise any authority, and this is the little authority he had, so he exercised it. It could be that he didn't have positive views of the Indians, and so he didn't want anything to make them better or humanize them. We have to really read into the text all sorts of things that is just pure conjecture. I don't think there's really enough of anything to say why he didn't want the missionaries there. And it very well could be that he just objected to the missionaries and not the Indians. We don't know. There's nothing in what is written here that will give us any indication as to his motives of stopping the missionaries. Whether it was pride, whether it was concern, whether it was just doing his job, whether it was, So we just have to leave it as it is what it is. And it's too bad. I wish it sounded like they could have done a lot of good among the Indians. That winter, their missionary work continued in Jackson County, and in the spring eastward into Lafayette County, while the elders taught school and tailored for our support. Wrote Peter Whitmer, Jr., they baptized 7. Among those converted were Joshua Lewis and his family. Lewis resided 8 miles west of Independence in Caw Township, west of the Big Blue River. The Lewis House, a 2-story log structure located near the Santa Fe Trail Road that went west from Independence to the Indian Agency and southward, was the place where early Mormons sometimes gathered, where Sidney Rigdon would dedicate the land of Zion, and where church leaders would hold the first Missouri Conference later that summer. In April, in Lafayette County, situated east of Jackson County, Oliver Cowdery and Richard Ziba Peterson baptized several converts, including Rebecca Hopper, whom Peterson married in August. Oh, how nice. During their missionary efforts in Jackson County, Oliver Cowdery complained of unpleasant treatment by his neighbors. "We are greatly wondered at," he wrote from Caw Township in April. A month later, with misgivings, he reported to his brethren in Ohio that almost the whole county, which consists of Universalists, atheists, deists, Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, and other professed Christians, priests, and people, are united and foaming against us. He added disparagingly, "We dwell in the midst of scorpions." Woof, that's rough. Okay, so I want to break down those particular groups. And the reason why is I think it's edifying. Like, here you are, a new religion coming to town, one that is barely or never heard of before. So I want to say it's like being the Blue Bloods versus the Nouveau Riche. I think it's a terrible analogy, so I don't want to use that. Blue Bloods are people who've had lots of money for a long time, and they have the prestige and history. Whereas the Nouveau Riche, meaning the newly rich, they're like, "Oh, you're now in this club, you filthy unwashed heathen," kind of thing. You can see the attitudes about it. There could be a little bit, but that's based on stuff that has a lot to do with being steeped in pride and steeped in materialism. So that's why it's a terrible analogy. But it's the reason it reminds me of that is just the attitudes that can occur, right? Because here you got, it's interesting. He starts with Universalists. If I understand right, Universalists are people who basically are along the lines of, yeah, whatever religion you want, man, that's cool. Whatever's there, right? Universalists would probably object to the claim from the Church of Jesus Christ that, hey, we are the true Church of Jesus Christ. We're restored. That Jesus Christ has restored the true church here. This is the church that should be joined. It kind of goes against the universalist idea of things, that everything's all right, man. It's all copacetic. You can do whatever you want. Because here you're laying down the law of saying, well, God has given authority to men to act in his name again, and that structure has returned. And next is atheists and deists. Atheists, they just object to the missionaries just because Well, they actually believe in God and are loudly proclaiming that God is speaking to people again. And if you are so against the total concept of God because you just don't think he exists, you think the missionaries are deceiving people, or however cynical you want to be. Especially on the fact that they were doing missionary work. Instead of just trying to generically, I don't know, I don't know how many, the difference between preachers preaching to try and convert people versus missionaries was, I don't know how culturally different that was to impact someone. To sit there and say, these guys are weird, they're going out and doing missionary work? Instead of just going, oh yeah, these are just preachers and they're starting their own congregation. But of course, as the guys on Ward Radio, specifically Cardin, would say, he'd be like, oh, they're getting pissed off because they think of it as a zero-sum game, and you're stealing away their people from their congregations. And it's like, yeesh, that's a little. That would apply much more to Presbyterians, Methodists, and Baptists. Deists, on the other hand, are just those people who generically believe in God. And you can see that nowadays, too. A lot of people who are just deists. There was Hayden Carroll's channel, where he's like, Let's Talk with Hayden Carroll, where he sits down at Arizona State University to converse with people. You can see that he's talked with people who are like deists. And some of them are very respectful and curious. Others, on the other hand, are very interesting because when Hayden tries to bring up points to help make them think and pull them away from, or pull them away from their own point of view to look back at their concepts, help them recognize, hey, you've got all these assumptions about how you're dealing with your thoughts about God. And these are assumptions, and you need to understand either why you have them, or you may want to re-examine them and allow for more things. It doesn't always work. Some people who are just deists, they kind of hold fast to their ideals. They're just like, well, I believe that there's a higher power, but I don't believe in any single religion. That's been around for a long time. And so if they keep running with that, and they keep denying anyone who would have any ideas or thoughts, or they just kind of balk at major religions. Why? Well, likely because of their experience with family members or experiences in life with other religions. So they'd rather become a thought unto themselves, right? Someone who feels independent and feels deterministic instead of allowing themselves to subject themselves to the will of the Lord, which is one way to look at it. For them, it would be, I'm an independent thinker. Why in the world would I want to subject myself to someone trying to tell me what it's supposed to be when I can think for myself? But the problem is they don't critically think of all these different organizations. They don't critically think of what would it take to be the truth or the true Church of Christ. Instead, they skip over. This is the thing with most people, including in the Church of Jesus Christ. It's just people in general, that we all tend to believe what we've been taught, or believe the set of principles we want to believe. And whenever we have something contradiction, we just kind of like ignore it. It literally just goes over our head. It doesn't stick in our mind, or we ignore it completely. This is why, we're the ones who talk about the scriptures that say, else then why were they baptized the dead if the dead rise not at all? Those are scriptures that are in there, and it shows that is happening, and people are doing it. But most other Christian religions just doesn't matter, right? If they're specifically the kind that believe only in faith only, why does this even matter at all, right? They just omit it. And so it's that kind of thing. But specifically, if it's against all other things, you get a deist. So Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, and other professed Christians priests, they were united and foaming against us. So, again, you're challenging people's worldviews. That's not fun and comfortable for anyone. See, the problem is that a lot of times when people are stuck in a rigid way that has worked for them, and you challenge those traditions and that worldview, remember, a worldview is the assumptions on which you base your reality. And the reason I put it in that way is because a lot of times they are assumptions, a lot of times they are assumed or taught, and they are not examined. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. This is the people who have like faith, blind faith. Now, there is a place for blind faith to work, to help people, but that is not the final state I think anyone should be in. And the reason why is I think it holds back your development. I think anyone who just says, God said it, I believe it, that's the end of it, like, sure, it takes out a lot of, worry and stress about other people saying things. But the problem is that instead of being able to examine, why do I believe what I believe? What are their contentions? Does it hold any water? How valid is it? Being open to learn and grow in that way is scary because it means you're putting on the table your beliefs, your world, your view of how the world works, your identity of who you are and how things work, and leaving it vulnerable. No one likes that. No one wants to be vulnerable, especially in their most basic, traditional, held beliefs that determine how they interact with the world. It's basically like someone taking a knife to your own heart, if it's something you identify with. So here you are coming to challenge the history of these places where, if there's some sort of Protestant, whether that's Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, etc., and you sit there and say, you guys, there is a firm church. God is speaking to man again, and those are things that they do not believe in. And so they think you're weird and you're crazy. Yeah. And they're rough people on the frontier. Remember, the book by Thomas Sowell, the Colonies and Conquerors, Conquests and Culture. Conquests and Culture by Thomas Sowell is an amazingly interesting book. He shows that plains people often were able to be overrun, and so they often got civilized faster. That usually meant that people who were up in hills or mountains, because they were harder to reach, easier to defend their positions from invading armies, etc., they were often warrior-like people, tougher-like people, also culturally backward type people, meaning that they did not accept the new culture, the new innovation that comes through, and so they were often considered either lazy or backwards or rough, etc. And the movement of those type of people around the world also determined different subcultures in different areas, especially considering that America was a colony-type country. So you had people from England in the plains, which meant that they had that Roman influence come in, and then the other invaders' influence come in, and all this other stuff. So they were used to changing and advancing and taking that culture, and so they were part of this big normative movement as they came over here to America. Whereas the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish, they were on the outskirts. They were farther away. They were harder to conquer. They were rougher people. They were tougher people. But it also meant that they did not adapt as fast. They did not want to adapt as fast. They were crass and traditionalist and moved at a slower pace because they didn't have to compete as much. And so, whether they liked it or not, and history started catching up, not history, but technology started catching up with them, when they moved to other places, like, again, in the United States, subcultures in the southern United States, they suddenly become everyone who is an immigrant, every time in these different waves of immigration as he goes through, all the immigrants always get bad reputations. And no matter what group of immigrants comes through, whether it was the Irish or the Scottish or the Welsh or the Chinese or the, let's see, who else came through in big, huge waves? Or the Dutch. Whatever it is, they get bad. Oh, German. Yeah. Whatever the immigration comes through, they get a bad reputation of being lazy or unproductive. Why? Probably because they have a harder time getting jobs. Why? Probably because it's harder for them to speak the regular language, even if they're English speaking, like the Welsh and the Irish and the Scottish. They can speak English, but they have heavy accents. But at the same time, there is a dual problem. Those same immigrants also get another reputation. They're either like, oh, lazy and jerks and thieves and blah, 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 whatever all the bad stuff. But there's also the ones where it's like, oh no, these are the really hardworking and the good immigrants, because they actually came because they want to integrate and catch up, and they really put their heart and mind into it. And then Thomas Sowell goes on and talks about how often those backward groups, as soon as they're done with taking enough crap from the world, they actually turn around and emphasize education and hard work. And as soon as you get education and hard work into the culture, suddenly they're the ones that start running the world. And now I have a book on my shelf that talks about how the Scots invented the modern world. It's really cool. So the reason I bring all this up is that for the missionaries coming to Missouri, they're the immigrants. They're the ones who are new to the block, and you're also dealing with people on the frontier who are rough people. These are traditionalists. These are the people that I do what I do because it makes it so I survive, and you are upsetting the apple cart. So I think this is me reading into the text and the situation, my points of view of what is likely happening to start having them be so foaming against us, as they say. John Mason Peake, a Methodist circuit writer and early associate of Isaac McCoy, who spent 40 years observing the advancing frontiers in the valley of the Ohio and Missouri rivers, named 3 types of settlers in the West: illiterate backwoodsmen, disgruntled farmers, and enterprising men of capital and ambition. Each class had within it the orderly and the restless, often which included the unchurched and intemperate, the lazy, and the lawless. Moreover, at the time the Mormons were in Jackson County, Independence was the outfitting station for merchants who sent wares and supplies to Santa Fe, as well as trappers, Indian traders, and frontiersmen headed to the far west. So to me, it sounds like a lot of people who either are enterprising or getting away from civilization. And so they may not want to have much to do with religion. A visitor who had traveled to the country widely lamented that Independence was the roughest town he had ever seen, with drinking, swearing, and fighting. The soon arriving Mormons, mostly from New England, note that that's a cultural difference. It's a huge difference. So Mormons, mostly from New England, New York, and Pennsylvania, a lot of Northerners, and Ohio, observed a different culture than they had known in the Northeast. Oh, okay, so he's saying that these people from mostly New England, New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio observed a different culture than they had known in the Northeast. New Yorker William W. Phelps, upon arriving at Independence with Joseph Smith in July 1831, wrote, "The people are proverbially idle or lazy, and mostly ignorant. Because these Missourians came primarily from the South, Phelps noted that they came with customs, manners, modes of living, and a climate entirely different from the Northerners." John C. McCoy, Reverend Isaac McCoy's son, and assistant surveyor, said that the differences between the settlers and the Mormons were so stark that it made them completely unfitted to live together in peace and friendship, and as wide apart as the poles. It was among this society that Mormons planned to establish their Zion. Okay, back to Thomas Sowell's Conquests and Culture, because this is literally the crux of what I was talking about. So the rough-hewn people from the Scottish, the Welsh, the Irish, they settled in the southern parts of America, and it became that kind of hick culture, I guess, is the best way to put it. And it established the southern culture of idleness, etc. Because in the South, because of the fair weather, and in Thomas Sowell's book, this is really cool. It describes these journal entries of people who came to the South, and they're like, yeah, every enterprising person among us that joined my shop, they were generally people who moved from the North. The people in the South here, they're so indolent and idle that basically they let their cattle run free during the winter and gather them in scrawny and still there, and basically they did as little work as possible to just enjoy life. And when you have good enough weather that you can do that, why bother with anything else? Why bother with learning? That it's that type of subculture that they had mashed into. Now, everyone should be taken on an individual basis, but among several individuals, you eventually have these groups, and these groups will have subcultures. And when you ascribe to subcultures, you can see that come through in how they talk and work and act and do things. You can see little bits of this in Mark Twain's book, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, that kind of thing, where you can see that Mark Twain was trying to capture the ignorance and the uneducated spirit in Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and how superstitious they were. There's certain chapters where they do funny stuff to get rid of a wart and talk about these superstitions. That was common around then. It's an amalgamation of Mark Twain's experiences, and it's to make light of it. It's to experience it in his writings. It's all very fascinating, but you get that kind of idea of Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer maybe not as much as Huckleberry Finn, but Huckleberry Finn, you get the idea that he was really just living on his own and not wanting to be anywhere or with anyone because he didn't like civilization. He didn't like being around people. They wanted to they wanted to enjoy being lazy. They wanted to enjoy just the good things in life without putting in much effort, right? And also the rough lives they live by trying to live that independent life. You see that when Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn go to that island, right? So I know those are fictional characters, but they typify some of that in an experiential way. And so if you have someone from the Northeast who's like, we have to work hard, we have to be industrious, because in the Northeast, you've got these horrifically hard winters where you have to be industrious while the light of day is out. You've got to chop the wood all the time so you have enough wood to survive during winter. You need to take care of your animals. You need to make sure things are ready. You have to have buildings to have your animals. That's just the agricultural side. Then you have shops and business owners who are like, okay, let's get trading done. Let's get goods here, services there, that kind of thing. Okay? Come down south where it's like, why bother with that? The land provides. You should relax. Just take what you need from what you want, from what you own. And then there was also, because remember how I talked about how it came from these rough-hewn cultures on the fringes that didn't want to civilize, that those rough-hewn cultures, and I said that they were warrior-like. Now this is why you have the Scottish are known for the fighting and look at Braveheart, etc. and the fighting Irish, etc. You've got this warrior type culture, and a lot of it is hung up on honor culture, where, again, in Thomas Sowell's book, Conquests and Culture, he talks about there was a serious paddle boat disaster that happened on the Mississippi. Why? because one paddle boat captain challenged the other to a race, and everybody on board was with it. Why? It was this honor thing where you don't say something bad about somebody unless you are willing to fight, sometimes to injury or death, about it. That whole honor culture is a huge influence. And so here you've got people who are rough, and a lot of them are indolent and indigent and ignorant, and on top of that, they have honor culture slapped on top of it. And they're being challenged by these Northeasterners who are like, hey, we need to get to work, get this done, be industrious. It's an affront to them in every way. It's like, oh, you just think you're being better than me. That whole pride that is cultivated in a culture of the honor culture is just so, oh, you're just trying to make yourself look better than me. It's, no, I'm just trying to build a house and cultivate my land and have a farm that is productive and works well. If you take offense to me being industrious, that's a problem. Now, this is the powder keg that they're walking into, is everybody in Missouri indigent, ignorant, and unread? No, that is just a group. The other groups, there are other people like who are the outfitters selling things out there, the people who are trappers. They're pushing the frontier forward. It's a mix of these hardened people out there. But you can see how this can become a powder keg real quick, especially when you are challenging their traditions, you're challenging their ideals, you're challenging their entire worldview, and you might be literally directly preaching against their culture. Imagine the people from the Northeast coming down and seeing this and saying to their face, yeah, you guys got to get up off your butts and do something with your life. And they're like, do you have a problem with the way that I'm living? And then you have that honor culture pride kick in and saying, oh, really? You carpetbagging northerner, you Yankee, why in the world do you think you know better than I do how to live my own life? Anyways, there's some background history from other books that I've read. It is, yeah. All right, establishing Zion. Oh, interesting. So the photographs they have on this page is a letter talking about the persecutions that they suffered in 1831. It's quite small, and I'm not very good at reading his script because it is so italicized. That would be interesting, though. And there's Edward Partridge, called as the first bishop of the church, to oversee the inheritances and stewardships, and Sidney Rigdon, designated by Revelation in D&C 58-57 to be the man to consecrate and dedicate the land of Missouri. He later served as first counselor to Joseph Smith in first presidency. So those are the pictures that we've got here. But let's continue. Establishing Zion. In February 1831, Joseph Smith moved to Kirtland, Ohio, and quickly gave his attention to 4 emerging concerns. 1, providing a financial means to build Zion. 2, identifying the exact site for the New Jerusalem. 3, publishing his revelations. And 4, establishing a body of the church in Jackson County. An early 1831 revelation to Joseph Smith set forth the financial law for the church, a cooperative system of industry and discipline, living associated with the principle of consecration and stewardship. Church members who moved to Missouri were expected to transfer their temporal assets to the newly appointed bishop, Edward Partridge, and in turn receive a stewardship deed, usually a land grant or the means to operate a trade shop or mill. With these inheritances, the stewards were expected to generate a surplus that would be used to establish the city of Zion and help the poor. Church leaders subsequently established a literary firm, approved the prophet's revelations for publication, purchased a press, and established a printing operation at Independence. So that's another problem, is that when you had mass migration all at once, there's a lot of members of the church who arrived who were also destitute. That here you have a population that they at least have their land and their way of life. They may be that old hick culture of, not wanting to do much, but they were there and they were established at least. But having someone who comes with nothing, and then suddenly you're expected to and perhaps they have highfalutin ideals compared to yours, and they're no better off than what you are. So, so they're talking about law of consecration stuff. And do any type of actual try at commune type living or consecrated type living in the church, it's a hard principle to endure, because you're not used to the idea of let's give everything over and try and build it up. In many situations, it is the best way to go, but you have to you have to have the right type of people, both in providing service and administering the property, deeds, etc. Plus, you just have to have the right people on both sides to even get that started. And then you need to work out a system to incentivize people to live the best way of doing everything for the building up of each other. You have to have it as a family type view in every way, that, hey, let's go help brother so-and-so, because he is a brother, and let's get him started. Let's go help sister so-and-so with her problems and things and what she wants to do, so that way she can get things done. And find those people who are willing to be devoted in whatever service or action they want to do, and give them the resources they need to get going. And, find work for those people who don't have an idea of how they want to approach life. That's the hard part, is the people who are like, well, I don't want to run a shop, or I'm not good at running a shop, or, you've got to find those people who have that kind of, I'll just do whatever, and give them something to do. And so, dealing with everyone's personalities to try and become an industrious area, that's rough. So, anyway. Joseph Smith, arriving at Independence, Missouri, July 14th, 1831, looked out the country and found the place for the city and temple. Wrote Joseph Knight, Sr., "The city should be called Zion," said Joseph Smith, "because it is to be a place of righteousness. Independence was to be the center place, stated a revelation, and a spot for the temple is lying westward upon a lot, which is not far from the courthouse, just outside the town boundary. Independence," wrote Ezra Booth, an elder who had arrived with Joseph Smith, "was a new town containing a courthouse built of brick, 2 or 3 merchant stores, and 15 or 20 dwelling houses, built mostly of logs. In time, the two communities, Independence and the New Jerusalem, in close proximity, undoubtedly would have converged, first culturally and eventually geopolitically." On August 2nd, 1831, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and others from Kirtland, Ohio, and other members of the Colesville branch met at the Joshua Lewis property in Caw Township, where they ceremonially laid a log for his school, and a meeting house dedicated the land. "I now pronounce this land consecrated and dedicated to the Lord," said Sidney Rigdon, "for a possession and an inheritance for the saints." The following day they dedicated the temple lot, on land later purchased by Bishop Partridge the following December. Before returning to Kirtland, Joseph Smith appointed those who would remain in Missouri to administer the affairs of Zion. Edward Partridge would preside as bishop. Algernon Sidney Gilbert would establish a store. The Gilbert, Whitney and Company, named for himself and his Kirtland business partner Newell K. Whitney. The store, which also served as the bishop's storehouse, was located in the back wing of Gilbert's log house, and later in a brick building facing the courthouse. William W. Phelps, assisted by Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer, would publish the newspaper The Evening and the Morning Star, and the Book of Commandments, a collection of the prophet's revelations. That publishing house is going to be a key figure in all these stories. Over the next 2 years, Bishop Partridge purchased land for the arriving saints as stewards over their own inheritances, and established 5 Mormon settlements, organizing them ecclesiastically along the western border in Caw Township, was the Prairie Branch, where Lyman White presided. 2 miles east on the edge of the prairie was Colesville Settlement, where Joseph Knight Jr. and his brother Newell operated a horse-powered grist mill, and Newell served as presiding elder. 2 miles north and closer to the Missouri River, in heavy timber on the main Santa Fe Road, commenced the Whitmer Settlement. Joshua Lewis lived on the south end near the newly constructed log house. Newly constructed schoolhouse, where most of the extended Whitmer family, composed of several family households, lived a mile north, and David Whitmer as the leading elder. 3 miles east on the main road from Independence, at the crossing of Big Blue River, which separated Kaw from Blue Township, was Blue River Settlement, the largest of the Mormon settlements, presided over by Thomas B. Marsh. Here, Orrin Rockwell and his son Orrin Porter operated a licensed ferry. 6 miles north of the river crossing was the Temple Lot, on which Bishop Partridge and his counselors Isaac Morley, John Corville lived, while W. W. Phelps, A. Sidney Gilbert, Oliver Cowdery, and others lived nearby in town. So, the pictures on this page. The Evening and the Morning Star was a church-owned newspaper published monthly from Jackson County, Missouri. William W. Phelps served as editor. Through this paper, revelations, doctrine, and instruction were disseminated. So again, culturally speaking, this is something that is going to be the touch point for a lot of stuff, because they are feeding this information to anyone who is interested in grabbing this stuff. You can see that this map that they have, you have non-LDS homesteads, which are the green dots, purple, which is property of the LDS Church, and from 1831 to 33, and then from 34 to 36 is the brown stuff. It's on both sides of the Missouri River. And you have Independence on one side of the Missouri River. On the north side, it's where you have Liberty. And so you can see that they're all sorts of spread out. Modley Settlement, Chase Settlement, Abbott Settlement. So here's the pictures. Here's the map. Here's the Evening and Morning Star they were talking about. Now, I'm going to point out something here as well. Okay? In the southern part of the river, you have a ton of non-LDS homesteads. And on the north side, you don't see that many dots, but it is right near Liberty. And so, that's an interesting one. I tend to think that there's going to be a lot of problems just because of different cultures. What's really interesting is that even in Thomas Sowell's book, remember how I said that when the cultures are tired of taking the crap of everyone and they focus on hard work and education, suddenly they turn around and become the ones who do so much. You have this Southern hick culture that, still made fun of today in certain ways. This is why when we try and talk in some sort of ignorant tone in America, you'll see people pull out some sort of Southern accent, because culturally it's associated with that idea. But what's really funny is when you listen to all the people in NASA, especially when we were putting men on the moon, a lot of them are from Texas and Florida and the South. And so you have all these astronauts come from these places. A lot of them came from the South. So it just comes down to and so we still have this holdover of, oh, if you want to sound smart and intelligent, you do some sort of English type accent. But if you want to sound stupid, then you sound like some sort of Southern hick, which is really hilarious because that has and completely changed. There's a bunch of flat earthers that I've seen that are in England, and there's plenty in America too. But yeah, it's funny how all these things flip around. So anyways, they're interspersing, especially among a whole bunch of people, is what I was thinking. And so you have south of the Missouri River, all the different settlements of the people already there. You have the church in the early part settling among them, which is next to Independence. And then north of that is Liberty, where north of the Missouri River. And it's, again, both Independence and Liberty are just west just east of the border. And that whole area on the Missouri River becomes Kansas City, Missouri, and just Kansas City in general later on. And they kind of subsume Liberty and Independence as suburbs of Kansas City. Well, that's an eventuality later on. The doctrine of gathering was a cardinal principle. Let's see here. How much more in chapter 1? I am going to stop right here for the day, just because it's getting on there, and we'll talk about them gathering. So, at least so far, we've covered that they came to preach to the Native Americans, the Indians. They were already being foamed at, as was written. The description of how these people who came from the South is consistent with almost every depiction written in journals by Northerners talking about Southerners as they came south that I've read in books across the whole of it. You have a point taken about how the other people that there are also either traditionalists or deists or other things. And so it's a setup of a powder keg of people who are obstinate, honor-bound, and willing to do drastic things when they're challenged for that honor. And here you're mixing people straight from the north who have an entirely different type of culture in how they work, how they operate, how they think, and how they're going about doing things too, especially trying to live the law of consecration. That's also different. So it all becomes, to me, I foresee this being the powder keg. They've already established where the Evening and the Morning Star publication was being done, which would later also have the Book of Commandments, and also be a touch point for hostilities. So we've got the setup. It's coming, and more is to come. So hopefully the insights from my other readings, such as Thomas Sowell's Conquests and Culture, is found to be helpful and insightful. I recommend reading it. It shows that there is a specific result about culture being more important. It doesn't matter who. There's conquering, and there's those who are conquered, and there's horror and terror in all that. Yes, but the culture that is either adopted or left behind could make the difference between life, death, prosperity, and regression. And Thomas Sowell illustrates that wonderfully. And he shows modern cultures that, bye dear, love you. He shows about modern cultures that the ones who adapted, such as the Scottish and the Irish and the Native Americans, how they adapted, and their adaptations were different. Or, let's see here, other people who were conquered. The English, obviously. England was this backwater island that everyone just ran over whenever they wanted to, for the longest time. And it wasn't until they were done taking the crap of the world that they became the English Empire. And, I mean, think about it. You had the Picts, the Romans, the Nords. They all run through and just take, it's an island. We can take it, especially the lower plains part, this thing called London. That's why we have such a weird, complex language, is that we have repositories from French, from, the Angles, Anglican, that's where you get the words like Anglican and English, is so you have the Picts, the Nords, so we have, like, Old Vikings words, we have French, we have Anglican, we've got holdovers, little bits and holdovers from cultural stuff, like from the Irish and the Scottish. It was just such a mix, and that's what makes modern English what it is. And So all the oddities that we have, or where we have basically two sets of English, it's because you have one set of English that's based from all the commoners who had all these different conquests happen to them, have their specific set of language, followed by the stuff that was from when the French invaded, and so you have the higher sounding, more cool words in English often have French roots. So it's a mishmash. Um, let's see here, but Thomas Sowell talks about cultures like in Africa, where here Africa was a rife for colonization from all of Europe, whether it was the Dutch, the French, the German, the English, etc., and then the colonizers and colonies fighting each other. It's just all over, right? So he focuses on specific sections in Africa, those that adapted and a lot of times for example, he was focusing on certain countries I think that were colonized by England, and that you had in this country a group that decided to adapt and learn how do you be industrious, do these businesses, run things, and then the general population that was geographically separate from the subculture that was also part of this country, but they were just tribally separate. And so when England was withdrawing its colonization, that smaller subset that lived in a harsher environment in the northern part of the country in Africa, they became the administrators. They were the ones that took over. And the country ran fairly prosperous on that. And they kept well, but because they started dividing tribally, then the other leaders from the larger populous group, who was in a southern, more plentiful, bounteous area that they didn't have to work hard because it was more green, more fruitful and productive without much effort, their leaders, they went off to good old Western civilization universities and learned about how they can say that they are oppressed. So even though they have a greater population and better soil, they kept saying that, well, we've been oppressed by these colonizers, and we've been oppressed by this, these traitors who are a smaller group carrying on the colonizing ways, and so we should get rid of them because they're the oppressors now, instead of England itself. So then these men who learned to be victims in the university system of the West then took over and started slaughtering those people who knew how to administer things because they decided to learn from the colonizers who brought the technology and made them prosperous. Well, this devolves into corruption, frankly. The people who are politically connected with the leaders are now the ones who are in charge. It's based on just whose palm can you grease to get ahead, whose relation are you. So it devolves into corruption. It devolves into just crying, I'm oppressed, I'm oppressed, I'm oppressed, to lead the people and to say, we are oppressed, and so we are going to smash the people who oppress us, even if by far and away you're the one wielding all the power and smashing those people who you've set up as the scapegoat. So you can see that which way do those people who are conquered go is based on the culture, which is, and to specify what culture is, it is the group of assumed ideals of a group and the ways in which they interact with each other and the world. That culture. So how do you react to things? What is the subset of beliefs that underlie how you work with people? And if you are a cohesive group with these shared ideals, that is a culture. It does not matter about your race. It does not matter where you came from. Because, again, Thomas Sowell's book, it shows, happened all over the world. The question is what do you do after? So there's plenty of people who were the butt end of the world, always laughed at, derided, and considered to be, the horrific, lazy bums of the world, who later turn around and make something great of themselves. And then there are others that turn around and don't do that. And it's because of the culture they decide to adopt after. And here he showed, here's one African country, went on to be prosperous. Here's a different African country, came up and failed. Why? Because of the culture that was adopted after, that of victimhood and blame and corruption. It's what happens. Is it universally the way that it should be? No, there's nothing universal about it. It literally is, what as a group do you want to adopt? This is why, after reading so many books and seeing how people work and operate, when I sit there and say, oh, how are we going to fix all these problems? You've seen my jaded criticism about politics and other things like that. We have to fix ourselves. And that means that we need to, as a group of people, continue to believe in the principles that God sets forward. I know it sounds trite or too simplistic, but that's the way it has to be. Because being able to emphasize education and hard work is huge. And you need to couple that with moral grounding and moral standing. Because if you work hard, let's say you work hard, but your focus is on greed, of lining your own pockets, and your morals are like, well, whatever, it's just how I need to get to the top, or I just need to get this next promotion, or I just need to, get this next thing, or I just need to show off that I have just as much as this executive over here. And you become disassociated from morals, and suddenly you lose sight of doing better for other people. It's all about yourself. I think the corruption in the system needs to be replaced by people of good faith and good work, of doing what is right for right's sake. The problem is that we have to deal with corruption of morals in people from both ends. Just like, if you think cops are corrupt, well, then you go and be a good faith police officer. Great. You have good faith police officers, but then you have people who are corrupt protesters. People who are trying to bend the system to their will and doing their things in ways that are shady as heck. And so, it doesn't matter which side you're on. It's going to be rough. Both, whether you're leading or following, you have to be good and moral people. And that's the best way to do it. And those who are wicked, well, this is why we have to turn to the scriptures to find answers to how do you take care of this. The best way I can think of it is you preach to the people. And then eventually, I think ultimately it would be natural that if there really is becoming such a division between those who are trying to be righteous versus those who are not, they will self-divide, because people who are righteous aren't going to be wanting to be in the rough part of the city. And those who enjoy those rough parts of the city where they have galleries and flop houses and the types of entertainment that are not entertaining to those who want to abstain from those things, it'll become this disparity. And the good question is how do you take care of it from there? There's no easy answers. Sometimes whether wickedness comes from becoming rich and corrupted or becoming poor and corrupted, it's corruption, right? It's just, and you want to help everyone you can, especially if they're your son, your neighbor, your cousin. You don't want them to go down the wrong path, but you want to love them anyway. Life becomes real messy. So, a whole bunch of food for thought about cultures, about mixing oil and water type cultures, dealing with all sorts of different shenanigans. And this is just the start of it. So, I hope this is educational in all sorts of ways. Life is a wonderful mess of all sorts of things, and I can strongly recommend, please, especially in your most basic views, learn to accept the seeds of goodness and truth that God gives us, that God is our Father, He loves us, you are of infinite worth because you're a son or daughter of God, that you can change no matter where you are in life. You can change in miraculous ways, even if it's one tiny choice that you're consistent at a time. That through that change, you can become a better and happier person. That the world is not terrible, that it's actually filled with all sorts of wonderful things that God has given us, and that we in turn can help give to others by making our lives better, as an example, trying to help others achieve the change that makes their lives better. And that way we can all be uplifted. So I hope these principles guide you, and I hope that when you look back at history as we are now, that you can see, all right, what could have changed the situation? How could the saints have done better? How could the people arriving, or that were already there, done better? And may the Spirit guide you in your circumstance right now, and have a great day.